"That ring is the same one my father used to wear," said the gardener to the millionaire. And then everything changed. Michael Anderson never imagined that a simple workday would change his life forever. For 15 years, he had tended the gardens of the mansion without questioning anything, simply doing his job with dedication and silence. On that Tuesday morning, as he pruned the white rose bushes near the terrace, he saw his employer approach to inspect the garden. Richard Thompson always supervised the work personally, but this time something caught Michael's attention differently. When the businessman gestured toward the flower beds that needed more attention, the sunlight hit the golden ring he wore on the ring finger of his right hand directly. Michael felt his heart race. His hands began to tremble as he held the pruning shears. That ring wasn't ordinary. It had a specific crest engraved, with details he knew all too well. It was identical to the ring his father, James Wilson, had worn before disappearing 30 years ago. "Mr. Richard," Michael said, his voice quieter than usual, "may I ask you something?" The 50-year-old businessman, always elegant in his dark suits, looked at the gardener in surprise. In all these years of work, Michael rarely initiated conversations. "Of course, Michael. What is it?" "That ring you're wearing." Michael hesitated, wiping his dirt-stained hands on his apron. "Where did you get it?" Richard instinctively looked at his own hand, slightly twisting the golden ring. His expression changed subtly, as if a shadow had passed over his eyes. "It's a family heirloom. Why do you ask?" "It's just—" Michael took a deep breath, trying to summon courage. "That ring is the same one my father used to wear. Identical. Same crest, same shape. My father disappeared when I was 15, and we never heard from him again." The silence that followed was heavy. Richard visibly tensed, adjusting his tie and avoiding Michael's direct gaze. "Must be a coincidence," the businessman finally said. "There are plenty of similar rings out there." "No, sir, it wasn't an ordinary ring." Michael took a step forward, courage growing inside him. "It had the Wilson family crest, a tree and 2 crossed swords. My grandfather had it made for my father when he married my mother." Richard visibly paled. His hands began to sweat, and he shoved them into his pockets, hiding the ring. "I don't know any Wilsons," he replied curtly, "and now I need to go inside, get back to work." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Michael stood motionless in the garden, watching Richard hurry into the mansion. His employer's reaction only confirmed his suspicions. It wasn't a coincidence. That ring had a story, and somehow it was connected to his father's disappearance. That afternoon, as he watered the plants in the side garden, Michael noticed movement in the library windows. Richard paced back and forth, speaking on the phone with agitated gestures. Several times the businessman glanced toward the garden, as if sensing he was being watched. Mrs. Patricia, Richard's wife, appeared on the balcony with a cup of tea. She was an elegant woman of 65, always kind to the staff. Unlike her husband, Patricia treated Michael with maternal warmth, often asking about his family and offering help when needed. "Michael, dear," she called, descending the marble steps toward the garden. "Is everything all right? You seem troubled today." "Mrs. Patricia, may I ask you a strange question?" "Of course, dear. Go ahead. Do you know the story behind that ring your Richard wears? The golden one with the crest?" Patricia stopped walking, the cup trembling slightly in her hands. She looked around as if checking if anyone else was listening. "Why are you asking this, Michael?" "It's just—" He hesitated but decided to trust her. "I think I've seen this ring before. My father wore one just like it before he disappeared." "Your father disappeared?" Patricia seemed genuinely surprised. "All these years you never told me that." "It happened a long time ago, Mrs. Patricia. I was 15. One day he left for work and never came back. My mother died of grief a few years later, always waiting for him to return." Patricia sat on the stone bench near the rose bushes, motioning for Michael to come closer. Her expression had changed, as if carrying a weight on her shoulders. "Michael, can I trust you?" "You always could, Mrs. Patricia. Richard wasn't always Richard Thompson." She spoke softly, glancing nervously at the house. When we married 20 years ago, he had a different last name. He changed it legally a few years after inheriting a fortune from a distant uncle. Michael felt the ground shift beneath his feet. What was his last name? Wilson. Richard Wilson. The world seemed to stop. Michael had to steady himself on the bench to keep from falling. Richard Wilson. His father's name was James Wilson. Could they be related? Brothers. Mrs. Patricia, does Mr. Richard have any brothers? He says no. Always claimed he was an only child. Patricia sighed deeply. But there are things in his past he's never wanted to tell me. When I ask about his family, he changes the subject. Do you think he's lying? I don't know, Michael. But lately, I've been finding strange things. Old letters hidden away, photos he keeps locked up. Once I found a document with the name James Wilson, but when I asked, he got furious and said it was business-related. Michael's heart pounded so hard, he was sure Patricia could hear it. James Wilson was his father's name. Mrs. Patricia, can you help me? How, dear? I need to see those documents. If Richard is my uncle, I have a right to know what happened to my father. Patricia fell silent for a few minutes, clearly torn between loyalty to her husband and compassion for Michael. Finally, she gently touched his hand. Tonight, Richard is going to New York on business. He won't be back until tomorrow. If you want, you can come here at 9 o'clock. But promise me you won't do anything to harm him or our family. I promise, Mrs. Patricia. I just want to understand what happened to my father. That evening, Michael could barely eat. He lived alone in a modest house at the back of the property, a benefit Richard offered to long-time employees. He paced back and forth, rehearsing questions and trying to prepare for what he might discover. At exactly 9 o'clock, he rang the staff entrance bell. Patricia opened it quickly, as if she'd been waiting behind the door. Come in quickly, Michael. The housekeeper has already left and the other staff don't come at night. The mansion felt different in the dim light. Patricia guided him through the marble hallways to Richard's study on the second floor. It was an imposing space, with mahogany bookshelves filled with volumes and a desk that looked more like a work of art. Richard keeps everything locked in that drawer. Patricia pointed to a special drawer in the desk. I've never been able to open it, but today I found the key hidden behind a book. With trembling hands, Patricia inserted a small golden key into the lock. The drawer opened with a soft click, revealing neatly organized folders, old documents, and a few photos yellowed with age. Michael stepped forward, his heart in his throat. The first photo he saw took his breath away. It was a picture of two young men, both wearing simple 1980s suits. One of them was clearly Richard, 20 years younger. The other was identical to his father. "So my God," murmured Michael, carefully picking up the photo. "This is my father and this is Richard." On the back of the photo, written in careful handwriting, was Richard and James Wilson, brothers, 1985. "They're brothers," said Patricia, her voice heavy with emotion. "Richard lied to me all these years." Michael kept sorting through the documents. He found birth certificates, land sale contracts, and several letters in his father's handwriting. One of them, dated 1993, was addressed to Richard. "Brother, I can't accept what you did. Selling Dad's land without consulting me was a betrayal. That land was our inheritance, our family history. Money isn't worth more than our honor. I'm too disappointed to keep living here. I'm leaving and I don't want to see you again." The letter was signed by James Wilson. "So that's it," said Michael, tears beginning to stream down his face. "My father didn't disappear. He fought with Richard and left." Patricia was reading another letter, this one written by Richard but never sent. "James, forgive me. I know I was wrong, but I needed the money to save the business. I didn't want to betray you, but I had no choice. Where are you? I need to explain. I need your forgiveness." "Richard suffered too," Patricia observed. "Look how many letters he wrote, but never sent." Michael found an entire folder of unsent letters. Richard had tried to reach out to his brother for years, always asking for forgiveness and explaining the circumstances that led him to sell the family land. In one of the most recent letters, from 5 years ago, Richard wrote, "James, I hired detectives to find you. I know you're alive and that you have a son. I want to return everything that's rightfully yours. The guilt consumes me every day. Please, give me a chance to explain." "Richard knows I exist," said Michael, lifting his head to look at Patricia. "He knows I'm his nephew. Then why didn't he say anything when you asked about the ring today? Maybe he's afraid of how I'd react, or ashamed of what he did in the past." Patricia kept searching through the documents and found something that changed everything. A private investigator's report, dated the previous year. The document showed that James Wilson was alive, living in a small town in Pennsylvania, and working as a caretaker on a farm. "My father is alive," murmured Michael, hardly able to believe it. "He's alive, and Richard knows where he is." The report included an address, recent photos of James, and details about his current situation. The investigator noted that James lived alone, seemed to have health problems, and rarely left the house. "Why didn't Richard go after him?" Michael asked. "Maybe he didn't have the courage," Patricia replied. "Or maybe he's waiting for the right moment." Suddenly they heard the sound of a car pulling in. Patricia rushed to the window and paled. "It's Richard, he's back early." Quickly they put everything back in the drawer and locked it. Michael hid in the office closet while Patricia went downstairs to greet her husband. "Patricia, why are the lights on upstairs?" Michael heard Richard's voice. "I was reading in the office, the bedroom light was too dim." "In my office? You never use my office." "I wanted to use the computer to look up some recipes online." Michael heard Richard's footsteps coming up the stairs. His heart pounded so hard he feared he'd be discovered. Richard entered the office and turned on all the lights. "Patricia, did you go through my desk?" "No. Why do you ask?" "The papers are out of place." Richard walked over to the special drawer and tested if it was locked. Michael held his breath, expecting to be found at any moment. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing, "It must be your imagination, Richard. You're tired from the trip." "Maybe." Richard seemed to accept the explanation. "I'm going to take a shower." Michael waited until he heard the sound of the shower before leaving his hiding spot. Patricia followed him silently to the staff exit. "Michael, what are you going to do now?" "I need to talk to Richard. He has to tell me the truth about my father." "Be careful. Richard could get very angry if he finds out we went through his things." "I don't care, Mrs. Patricia. I spent 30 years not knowing whether my father was alive or not. I can't wait any longer." The next morning, Michael arrived at work earlier than usual. He wanted time to think about how to approach Richard with what he'd discovered. He started by trimming the plants near the pool, where he knew Richard usually had breakfast. At 8 o'clock, Richard came out of the house wearing a blue silk robe, carrying a cup of coffee. He sat at the wicker table by the pool and opened the newspaper. Michael kept working, waiting for the right moment to approach. "Good morning, Michael," Richard said, without looking up from the paper. "Good morning, Mr. Richard. Can I speak with you?" "If it's about work, go ahead." "It's about my father." Richard stopped reading and looked directly at Michael. The tension was clear on his face. "Your father. James Wilson. Your brother." Richard dropped his coffee cup, which shattered on the marble floor. He turned pale as if he'd seen a ghost. "How did you—" "I know everything, Uncle Richard. I know you fought over the land. I know my father left, and I know you've been looking for him for years." "Who told you that?" "It doesn't matter how I found out. What matters is that you lied to me all these years. I'm your nephew, and you knew it." Richard stood up from his chair and walked to the edge of the pool. He stayed silent for several minutes, his hands trembling. "Michael, do you know where he is?" "I do." "Then why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you go after him?" Richard turned to face Michael, his eyes wet with tears. "Because I'm a coward. Because I'm ashamed of what I did. Because I don't know how to ask forgiveness for destroying our family." "What exactly happened, Uncle Richard?" Richard sat down on one of the lounge chairs, running his hands over his face. For several minutes, he seemed to wrestle with himself, as if deciding how much of the truth he could tell. Our father died in 1990 and left the family land to both of us. It was 5 acres of good land close to town. James wanted to keep it, maybe build a house, start a family there. I wanted to sell and use the money to invest in business in the city. And then? We fought bitterly. He refused to sell. I refused to stay. So, Richard hesitated. So I forged his signature on the papers and sold my share to a broker. Michael felt his blood boil. You forged my father's signature? Yes, and worse. The broker was dishonest. He used the forged documents to take possession of the entire property, not just my half. James lost everything because of me. My God. Michael sat on the ground, his legs too weak to hold him up. When James found out, he came to me. He said he never wanted to see me again, that I'd destroyed our family for money, that he'd never forgive me. And you just let him go? I tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. He said he was going to start a new life far away from me. Richard wiped the tears from his face. That was the last time I spoke to my brother. But you got rich. You got what you wanted. I got money, Michael. I didn't get peace. All these years, the success in business hasn't brought me a single day of real happiness. I live with the guilt of having betrayed the only brother I ever had. Michael stood in silence, processing everything he had just heard. Part of him felt anger toward his uncle, but another part saw a man broken by the weight of guilt. Did you ever try to find him? Yes. I hired investigators, traveled to several cities, asked people who might have news of him. I only managed to locate him 2 years ago. And why didn't you go to him? What would I say, Michael? That I regret destroying his life? That I want to give back what I stole? He built a new life without me. Maybe it's better to leave it that way. Better for who? For you or for him? Richard didn't answer. Michael stood and walked until he was face to face with his uncle. Uncle Richard, I want to see my father. Michael, I want to see my father. You owe me that much at least. What if he doesn't want to see me? What if your presence brings back bad memories? That's his decision, not ours. He has the right to know I exist, that I grew up without a father because of this fight, that I spent my whole life wondering if he was even alive. Richard walked to the table where he had left the newspaper and picked up the phone. What are you doing? Canceling all my appointments for today. We're going to Pennsylvania. Now? Now I can't wait another day. I've already wasted too much time. Within 2 hours, they were on the road. Richard drove a black Cadillac, silent and tense. Michael stared out the window, trying to imagine what it would be like to see his father after 30 years. Michael, I need to tell you one more thing, Richard said as they neared the Pennsylvania border. What? Your father doesn't know I found him, and from what the investigators told me, he's not in good health. What does that mean? Apparently, he had a stroke a few years ago. There were lasting effects. He might not recognize you right away. Michael felt his heart tighten. Is he being taken care of? Yes. He works as a caretaker on a small farm. The owners are good people who treat him like family. Do they know we're coming? No. I thought it was better to arrive unannounced. If your father doesn't want to see us, we'll leave. The rest of the drive passed in silence. Michael was nervous, imagining how his father would react. 30 years was a long time. He had been a child when James left. Now he was a grown man. The farm was in the countryside of a small Pennsylvania town. It was a simple place with a white main house and several smaller buildings around it. Richard parked near the gate, and they both stepped out of the car. A woman around 50 approached them. Her face was sun-worn and she wore simple work clothes. Good afternoon. Can I help you? Good afternoon, Richard replied. We're looking for Mr. James Wilson. We heard he works here. Yes, Mr. Wilson lives in the cottage back there. She pointed to a small house at the back of the property. But he's not doing too well today. He had an episode last night. What kind of episode? Michael asked, concerned. Mr. Wilson gets confused sometimes, you know, because of the stroke. Last night he was very agitated, talking about brothers, about an old fight. He cried a lot before falling asleep. Michael and Richard exchanged glances. It was as if James had somehow sensed their visit. "Can we see him?" Richard asked. "Of course. He's always happy to have visitors. I'll call him." The woman led them to the small cottage in the back. It was simple but clean, with basic furniture and several plants on the porch. Richard nervously twisted the golden ring he still wore on his finger. "Mr. Wilson, you have visitors." The door opened and Michael found himself face to face with his father for the first time in 30 years. James was thinner now, his hair completely white and deep wrinkles marking his face. He wore simple work clothes and leaned slightly on a cane. When James saw Richard, his expression transformed, first surprise, then anger, and finally a deep sadness. "Richard," his voice came out hoarse, as if unused for a long time. "Hello, James. What are you doing here?" "I came to ask for forgiveness, and I brought someone who's been longing to see you." James looked at Michael, studying his face. Slowly, his eyes widened in recognition. "Michael?" he murmured. "My son? Michael?" "Hi, Dad." James dropped his cane and embraced his son, weeping like a child. Michael cried too, breathing in his father's scent, feeling the warmth of the hug he'd waited 30 years for. "My son, how you've grown. How handsome you are." James touched Michael's face as if needing to confirm he wasn't dreaming. "Dad, I've searched for you my whole life. And I've thought of you every day, my boy, every single day." Richard stood at a respectful distance, watching the reunion. James finally looked at him, his face hardening again. "Why did you bring my son here, Richard?" "Because he deserves to know you, and because I need to ask for forgiveness. Your debt to me can't be repaid with an apology. I know, but I had to try." The farm's owner, sensing the tension, offered them the porch of the main house to talk more comfortably. James nodded, still gripping Michael's hand tightly. Seated on the rustic porch overlooking the Pennsylvania mountains, Michael told his father about his life, how he'd grown up with his mother, how she'd waited for James until the end, how he'd studied and become a gardener. "A gardener?" James smiled for the first time. "Just like me. I always loved plants. I got that from you. I've been tending the gardens of a mansion for 15 years. And where is this mansion?" Michael glanced at Richard before answering. "On Uncle Richard's estate." James fell silent, processing the news. "You work for him?" "I do, but I only found out he was my uncle yesterday." "Richard, did you know my son was working for you?" "I learned 2 years ago when the investigators told me about Michael, but I didn't have the courage to say anything." 2 years? James's voice burned with anger. "You let my son work for you for 2 years, knowing who he was?" "James, You're even more of a coward than I thought." The mood grew tense again. Michael felt he had to step in before things escalated. "Dad, Uncle Richard told me about your fight, about the land, the forged documents." "He told you?" James looked at Richard in surprise. "Everything. And he said he's been trying to find you for years to ask for forgiveness." "Forgiveness won't bring back what I lost, Michael." "It won't," Richard agreed, "but I can try to make things right." "How?" Richard retrieved a folder from his car and handed it to James. Inside were documents and bank statements. "I opened an account in your name 10 years ago. I've deposited half of everything I've earned since we parted. The money is yours, with interest and adjustments." James flipped through the papers, his eyes widening at the figures. "This is a lot of money." "It's less than you deserve, but it's all I can offer materially." "And personally?" Richard removed a gold ring from his finger and held it out. "This ring was always yours. You're the eldest. It came from father first. I had no right to keep it." James stared at the ring for a long time. Michael could see the struggle inside his father, between old anger and the hope for reconciliation. "Richard, why did you sell father's land?" "Because I was young and ambitious. Because I thought money mattered more than family. Because I was a fool." "And now? What's changed?" "Now I know I spent 30 years rich but unhappy. That all the success in the world isn't worth a single day with family. That I made the biggest mistake of my life." James took the ring and examined it carefully. This ring has our family's history engraved on it. Our grandfather used to say whoever wore it had the responsibility of keeping the family together. I failed in that responsibility. We both failed, Richard. I could have tried to forgive you, tried to understand your reasons. I was too proud too. Michael watched the two brothers, seeing decades of resentment begin to dissolve. James held Richard's hand. Brother, you hurt me deeply, but I've also suffered so much being away from family. James, let me finish. James wiped the tears from his eyes. When I had the stroke, I thought I'd pass on without making peace with you, without knowing my grandchildren, without seeing my son grow up. You have grandchildren? Michael smiled. I have 2 children, Dad. Ethan, who's 12, and Emily, who's 8. Your grandchildren. My grandchildren. James wept with emotion. Richard, do you have children? Patricia and I were never able to have any. Richard was also emotional. I always wanted a bigger family. Well, now you have one. Michael is like a son to you, and Ethan and Emily are your grandnephew and niece. The afternoon passed quickly as the 3 talked. James spoke about his life on the farm, how he'd learned to cope with the after effects of the stroke, how the farm owners treated him well. Richard talked about business, how he'd invested the money from selling the land, about his marriage to Patricia. Michael shared about his children, how he'd built a family even without a father present, how he'd always honored James's memory. Dad, would you like to meet your grandchildren? More than anything in the world, son. And would you come back to New York with us? James hesitated. I don't know, Michael. This farm has been my home for many years. The people here know me, take care of me. You don't have to give anything up, Dad. You can come and go as you please. Richard has a big mansion with plenty of space. It's true, James, you'd be more than welcome. Patricia would be happy for the company. But what if I have another episode? If I get confused again? Then we'll take care of you, Michael said. Family takes care of family. James looked at the 2 of them, then at the mountains in the distance. All right, let's try. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The farm's owner, Mrs. Rose, was moved to hear James had reunited with his family. She helped pack his few belongings and promised he'd always have a place there if he ever wanted to return. Mr. Wilson was like a father to us, she told Richard and Michael. Take good care of him. The trip back to New York was completely different from the way there. James sat in the back seat, sharing childhood stories about him and Richard, talking about their parents, about family traditions Michael had never known. Richard, remember when our father taught us to fish in the creek behind the house? I do. You always caught more than me. That's because I had more patience. You always wanted quick results. Still do, Richard laughed. Some things never change. Michael felt whole for the first time in his life. Finally, he had a father and discovered he also had an uncle. His children would have the grandfather he never did, and Patricia would gain the family she'd always wanted. When they arrived at the mansion, Patricia was waiting at the door. Richard had called on the way, telling her about the reunion. She hugged James like a long-lost brother. James, welcome to our home. Now it's yours too. Thank you, Patricia. Richard was lucky to find a woman like you. No, I was the lucky one to find a family like yours. Michael called his wife, Jennifer, asking her to bring the children to meet their grandfather. An hour later, Ethan and Emily arrived, shy but curious. Grandpa James? Asked Emily, the youngest. Yes, my dear, I'm your grandfather. The children were quickly charmed by James, who had endless patience to answer their questions and tell them stories. Richard watched the scene with emotion, seeing the house fill with family life. During dinner, James told the children about the Wilson family, about the great-grandfather who had created the ring's crest, and about traditions that had been lost over the years. Grandpa, why does Uncle Richard have the family ring? Asked Ethan, ever observant. James and Richard exchanged glances. It was a complicated question to explain to a child. Because sometimes families drift apart for a while, James replied. But what matters is, they always find their way back together. And now you'll stay together forever? "We'll try, grandson. We'll try." That night, Richard showed James the room he had prepared for him. It was a comfortable ground-floor space, adapted for his physical limitations, with a view of the garden Michael tended. "Richard, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you keep those letters you wrote to me but never sent?" Richard sat on the bed beside his brother. "Because they were the only way I could talk to you. Every time I felt guilty, I'd write a letter. It was like you were listening. And sometimes I felt your presence. I couldn't explain it, but I knew you were thinking of me. I always was, James. Every day. Richard, I need to tell you something. When I had the stroke, I saw our whole life flash before my eyes, and I regretted not trying to forgive you sooner." "Why?" "Because family is the only thing that really matters. Money, pride, reasons. None of it's worth a lifetime away from the people we love." The two brothers embraced, finally making peace with the past. In the days that followed, the mansion's routine changed completely. James helped Michael in the garden, teaching him old planting and plant care techniques. Patricia had company for her morning walks. Richard started coming home from work earlier to spend time with the family. The children visited every day after school, doing homework with their grandfather, listening to his stories, and learning about the family's history. James, in turn, seemed to grow younger with his grandchildren around. One afternoon, as Michael and James planted new rose bushes in the garden, Richard came home earlier than usual. His expression was serious. "Michael, James, I need to talk to you." "Did something happen?" Michael asked. "Remember the broker who cheated us out of our land 30 years ago?" "I do," James replied. "Why?" "My lawyers found out he used fake documents in several other deals. The courts are reviewing all the contracts he handled back then." "And what does that mean?" "It means we might be able to reclaim our father's land." James stopped planting, wiping his hands on his shirt. "After 30 years. It's possible. The lawyer said we have a good chance, especially since I kept all the original documents. Richard, I don't want to get my hopes up. Neither do I, James. But I thought you should know." Michael looked at his father and uncle. "What would you do with the land if you got it back?" "I don't know," Richard admitted. "I never thought it was possible." "I'd like to take my grandchildren there," James said. "Show them where their great-grandfather lived, where our family began." "That would be beautiful, Dad." During the following weeks, the lawyers worked on the case. Richard hired the best real estate law specialists, determined to right the past wrong. James followed the process with interest, but without getting too emotional, afraid of being disappointed again. The first hearing took place a month after the family meeting. Richard, James, and Michael went to the courthouse together. The broker, now an elderly and seemingly ill man, admitted to using forged documents in several transactions during the 1990s. "Your Honor," said Richard's lawyer, "my client and his brother were victims of a proven fraud. The lands were obtained illegally and never ceased to legally belong to the Wilson family." The judge reviewed all the documents and ruled in favor of the brothers. The lands were returned to the Wilson family, along with compensation for 30 years of improper use. When they left the courthouse, James was in tears. "Richard, we did it. We got our father's land back. We did, brother. And this time, we'll do it right." "What do you mean?" "The land is yours and Michael's. I already have enough assets. You two will decide what to do with it." Michael hugged his uncle and father. "We'll decide together, as a family." The first visit to the reclaimed land was emotional. The place had changed a lot over the years, but it still had features James recognized. There was an old wooden house, somewhat deteriorated, where the brothers had grown up. "Ethan, Emily, this was your great-grandfather's house," James explained to the children. "Can we live here, Grandpa?" "I don't know, sweetheart. It would need a lot of repairs." Richard walked around the property, seeing the place with adult eyes for the first time in decades. "James, how about we build a new house here? A place where the whole family can gather on weekends. That would be a dream come true. And we could plant a big garden with all the flowers our mother loved," Michael suggested. "And a vegetable patch to teach the kids how to plant," James added. The country house project became the family's new shared goal. Richard hired architects, but all decisions were made together. James wanted the house to have a big porch, like the old one. Michael wanted a garden visible from every room. Patricia suggested a studio where she could paint. The children asked for a playground and a picnic area. During the 6-month construction, the family grew even closer. Every weekend, they visited the site to check on the progress. James, despite his limitations, insisted on planting saplings that would one day shade his grandchildren. The day of the housewarming was unforgettable. The whole family was there, including Jennifer, and even Mrs. Rose, the lady from the farm where James had lived. Richard gave an emotional speech. "This house is more than just a place to live. It represents our family's reconciliation, the forgiveness that overcame pride, the love that outlasted resentment." James, sitting on the new porch with the golden ring now back on his finger, watched his grandchildren playing in the garden Michael had planted. "Richard, do you know what our father would say if he saw us now?" "What?" "That the ring fulfilled its purpose. It kept the family together even when we were apart." "How so?" "Because it was the ring that brought Michael to you. It was the ring that made my son acknowledge our history. It was the ring that brought us back home." Richard sat beside his brother, watching the gathered family. "James, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When I'm gone, I want the ring to go to Michael, so he can pass it to his children and they to theirs." "Why don't you want to keep it?" "Because I've learned that the ring's value isn't in the gold or the crest. It's in the responsibility of keeping the family united. And Michael understands this better than I do." Michael, who was watering the flowers near the porch, overheard the conversation. "Uncle Richard, I won't need the ring to remember the importance of family. You two taught me that." "Then use it to teach your children," said James. "And when they grow up, teach them to pass it on." That night, the whole family slept in the new house for the first time. The children in the room facing the garden, Michael and Jennifer in the blue bedroom, Patricia and Richard in the master suite, and James in the ground floor room with a view of the mountains. In the morning, Michael was the first to wake. He stepped out onto the porch and found his father already sitting there, watching the sunrise. "Good morning, Dad. Couldn't sleep." "I slept well, son. I just woke up early to see the sun rise over our land." "Our land. I like hearing that." "Michael, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you forgive me for leaving when you were a child?" Michael sat beside his father. "Dad, you didn't leave. You were pushed away by an unfair situation. There's nothing to forgive." "But I could have tried to find you sooner. And I could have searched harder. But what matters is that we're together now." "You're right, son. The past is behind us. What matters is the future we'll build together." Richard appeared on the porch carrying 3 cups of coffee. "Good morning, family. Breakfast on the porch?" "A new Wilson family tradition," James laughed. "Speaking of traditions," Richard said, "how about we start bringing the whole family here once a month to keep alive the unity we've fought so hard to regain?" "Great idea, Uncle Richard," Michael agreed, "and we could document these gatherings, take photos, create a family album." "And tell the children stories about their ancestors," James added, "so they always know where they came from." The 3 men fell silent, gazing at the garden waking under the morning sun. It was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by a reunited family, a peace hard won after much suffering. "Richard," James said suddenly. "Yes?" "Thank you for bringing my son back to me." "Thank you for forgiving me." "Thank you for finding me," Michael finished. In that moment, the 3 understood they had built something far greater than a family reconciliation. They had created a legacy of forgiveness, second chances, and love that overcomes any hurt. The children woke soon after, filling the house with laughter and energy. Patricia appeared in the kitchen, preparing a special breakfast. Jennifer joined her, and soon all the women of the family were working together. "Grandpa James," Emily called from the bedroom window. "Come see, there's a little bird building a nest in the tree you planted." "Coming, my sweet granddaughter." James rose from his chair, leaning lightly on his cane. Richard and Michael followed him into the garden, where the children were excitedly pointing at a small blue jay that had chosen one of the saplings James planted to build its home. "Grandpa, Why did it pick this tree? Because birds know how to recognize places filled with love, Emily. They can sense when a family is united and happy. And is our family united and happy? James looked around, seeing Richard and Patricia holding hands, Michael embracing Jennifer, Ethan running through the garden. He touched the golden ring on his finger and smiled. Yes, my dear granddaughter, our family is complete. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this story of reconciliation and forgiveness. Do you think Richard made the right choice by seeking out his brother? And James, do you think he did the right thing by forgiving? Share your honest thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and leave a like so you don't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.